Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode. Hopefully you can't hear the kids outside of my window. I live next to a school and I am filming this when they are out playing. But anyway, I am really excited for this week's episode because I want to share about a life-changing experience that I had recently, and an experience that can hopefully benefit anyone interested in personal growth, in just personal evolution. A few weeks ago, I attended the Hoffman Process, which is a week-long retreat focused on personal growth. It's a retreat that you go into without a phone. You have no contact with the external world. You are not allowed to read books. You are not allowed to exercise. You are not even allowed to talk about what you do at work outside of the process. This is a retreat that you do with about 30 to 35 other strangers, and it was life-changing. I did the Hoffman Process at the California Retreat Center in Petaluma. They also have a retreat center in Connecticut, as well as in like 10 other countries: Spain and Brazil, in Russia and Italy, in the UK, in Austria. I did the Hoffman Process at their Petaluma campus in California. And the way that I like to describe it when people have asked me how it was is intense, magical, life-changing, and truly transformational. So I wanted to talk about it today because I want to share with you what I learned from the process, which I think can be applicable and relevant for anyone listening who wants to live a more purposeful and meaningful life. And also because as I was deciding whether to go to the Hoffman Process, what really helped me was listen to podcasts of those who had gone to share about what they learned and what their experiences were like after the Hoffman Process. So hopefully if this is a video or a podcast episode that you're listening to or watching and you're thinking about the Hoffman Process, it can be helpful to you to determine whether this is a retreat or an experience for you at this time of your life. But anyway, let's take this back and talk a little bit about what the Hoffman Process is. The process is a week-long retreat, as I mentioned, that helps you identify negative patterns learned from childhood that you adopted when you were little. So at its core, I do believe that this is a spiritual retreat, but it's not affiliated with any religion. And it's really focused on your childhood and your parents. And that is because when we are kids, we simply want to be loved by our parents. So what that means is that we adopt or react to their behaviors in order to gain their love, because that's how we think we will receive love. Now, sometimes these behaviors that we adopt or react to limit us as we grow up and as we become adults. So the Hoffman Process helps you identify these negative behaviors or patterns, as they call them, and become aware of them, remove them from your life, and create new ways of being that help you live a meaningful and purposeful life that's aligned to your true, authentic self. Which, if you think about what I just said, it's like, you're like, how can you do this all in 1 week? And trust me, I was a little skeptical going into it because I was like, how is this so transformational in a week? But as someone who went 2 weeks ago, I can attest that it is transformational and it's truly magical. But anyway, more about the Hoffman Process. It was created by a man named Bob Hoffman in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So this has been going on for over 3 decades. And Bob Hoffman created it to help people reconnect with love and find freedom. And he coined a few phrases or concepts that are used in the process and are actually publicly available at the Hoffman Institute website, where you can access all of this information. So anything that I share with you now is public information that you can learn more about by going to the Hoffman Process website. 2 concepts that Bob Hoffman coined that are important to know is, number 1, quadrinity, which is meant to describe the 4 elements or the 4 aspects that make up a human being: the body, the intellect, the emotional self, and the spiritual self. And Bob Hoffman believed that most of us, especially those that were raised and conditioned in the Western culture, have given a lot more meaning to the intellect than to the other aspects of ourself. And even if you were not raised in the West, you may still be off balance. There may not be harmony across these 4 aspects of self. So what he believed is that in order to be free and in order to have self-love and ultimately love for others, one needs to be in harmony and in balance across these 4 aspects of self. Now, he wrote an essay that is also publicly available on the Hoffman website that goes into detail of this. And it's really helpful to understand as we think about the second term that he coined as the negative love syndrome, which he describes as an intergenerational pain that's passed down from one generation to the other. Everyone is guilty and no one is to blame because we are human and imperfect. And it's what I talked about earlier, that we learn as children behaviors from our parents who in turn learned those behaviors from their parents. So it's not until we break that cycle that we become free of those negative patterns. In both of these concepts, the quadrinity and the negative love syndrome are discussed within the context of what Bob Hoffman calls the cycle of transformation, which is the cycle that the Hoffman process is all about to transform yourself. It starts with awareness, goes into expression, compassion and forgiveness, and then new ways of being. And it's the cycle that you go through while you're at the process to leave the retreat feeling clear, feeling energized and excited by what's to come in life. And there's a great explainer video that goes into all these concepts: quadrinity, negative love syndrome, and the cycle of transformation on the website. So that's about the Hoffman process. The reason why I wanted to go is because I found the Hoffman process, the Hoffman Institute, which is the organization that organizes the Hoffman process, a few years ago. This was right after the pandemic. I was, I think, maybe a little lost, and I was looking for retreats, I suppose, or things that would help me get out of a rut that I was in. And I found the Hoffman process. I looked around and I found the website. I, read a little bit about it, but I didn't think much of it. And then a few months later, a friend of mine actually went to the Hoffman process. Then I was like, maybe I should continue to learn more about it. And so I continued to go to the website. I continued to listen to the podcast, read blogs. I every so often would listen to a podcast episode of a famous person who'd done it and be like, this is really interesting. I wonder if I could benefit from it. But it wasn't until I started meeting people who had actually done it that convinced me to commit to doing the process. Now, truthfully, I will also say that the price was really intimidating to me because I was like, it's a lot of money. And then I realized that there is a scholarship. I was like, okay, if there's a scholarship, I don't lose anything by applying to it. So I thankfully received a scholarship and then locked in a date for my process, which happened to be, as I mentioned, just a couple of weeks ago, 1 week before Thanksgiving. Leading up to the process, I remember listening to this episode from the Skinny Confidential with Jen Atkin, who is one of the famous people who went to the process, talking about how her book, Blowing My Way to the Top, would have maybe not happened if it weren't for the Hoffman process. And so that piqued my interest, and I was like, I wonder why. And as someone who's slowly removing any limiting beliefs about being creative, I was like, maybe I could benefit from the Hoffman process for theory and practice. And that was what I was going into the process with, this mindset. Maybe I can benefit from it for creative purposes. But little did I know that life has surprises and challenges, and life happens. And so things happen in my life that made me realize, thank goodness that I'm going to the Hoffman process at this time. Because when I applied for the scholarship and when I applied for the Hoffman process in general, I thought that I was going to go in with a different set of things to work through, body image, creativity, etc. And then I actually went in wanting to address that and also other aspects of my life. So it happened to be a really necessary time in my life, and I'm really grateful, really, really grateful that I went when I did. So what was it like being there? Well, as I mentioned, you're there with around 30-ish other people who you don't know. I really enjoyed that because I got to know people not because of what they did at work or how successful they might have been, but based on other genuine connections, hobbies, or how they liked the food that we ate. It was a really amazing way to connect, to remind myself that you can connect with someone without having to talk about what you do for work. And so I really like that. And then I also found that you don't have to share anything that you don't want to. Sure, you're there to work through the stuff that you want to work through, but you don't have to share that with the whole group. If you want to, you can. But there's a really special way to address what you're wanting to address without having to share it openly with every person in the room. So I really like that. And I also really like that they pair you with teachers or one teacher so that you have a smaller group. Within those 30 people, there are groups of about 8 or 9 that work with one teacher that checks in on you periodically. And so the relationship that you build with that teacher is really beautiful and loving, and I'm really close to mine and also to the people in my small group. Now, I will say, though, I have to admit, when I got there, even though I was super excited, I was also a little skeptical. You know, I've been going to therapy for 5 years. How is a week going to transform my life? Especially because every person that I spoke to simply just like had wonders to say. And so I was like, this is so interesting. The other interesting part is that no one told me what to expect. And I was like, why is no one telling me what you do at the process? And now I know why. So for the purposes of this episode, I will not be sharing or going into details of the activities or work that you do at the process, because part of not knowing is the beauty of the experience. Not knowing what you're getting into adds to that magical experience that the process is. So I remember even like going into the first day and telling my teacher, like, no one has told me anything, so I have really high expectations because everyone leaves just so happy and grateful to have gone, and so I hope that it meets my expectations. And she just kind of like met me with a smile. The last day I remember leaving and I was like, wow, this totally exceeded my expectations. So I continue to rave about it, even though it's a very difficult week, very, very intense week, but I just benefited from it. It's a lot. You do a lot. Each day is packed. I remember we woke up at like 7 and then we'd go to bed at 10:30. The days are long and they're intense, but they are so, so rewarding. So what I learned at Hoffman were a few things. Number one is that all my life I had prioritized rational, logical thinking to make sense of my feelings. Even as someone who considered herself highly spiritual and emotional, I hadn't realized that I had been intellectualizing my feelings since I could remember. And the process really helped me put my overthinking mind to rest and take a break from thinking so much and thinking so much with a lot of anxious, nervous energy. I even, again, remember thinking of this when I got there. I was like frantically taking notes and I was thinking, oh, this person in my life would benefit from this. Oh, this person in my life should be here. I also was like kind of trying to think of what outcome I wanted versus just letting things flow. And throughout the process, especially the first few days, I realized that kind of like maybe I should just kind of like let my mind take a little bit of a break. And it took me a day and a half to just calm down, be present, be in the moment. And overall, the process also helped me remember that I am more than my mind. Each of us is more than just our brain. And sure, our brain is incredibly important, especially with work and side hustles. That is incredibly important, as is my emotions, my physical self, and my spiritual self. The process also helped me have a better relationship with expressing my feelings, because if you think back to the cycle of transformation, right? It's this idea that expression comes after awareness, and it comes before compassion and forgiveness and before new ways of being. You can't really transform without expressing your feelings first. So prior to the process, I used to like jump from awareness to compassion and forgiveness, always like skipping expression, because I grew up, and I think many women can relate to this, thinking that girls shouldn't be angry. Girls are shy and timid and obedient and goody-goodies, and anger is for boys. That's a pattern that I had. That is a learning, a belief that I had when I was younger that I carried on with my life and realized it wasn't serving me. I remember even talking to my teacher and being like, I just don't really know how to be angry or like how to properly process anger because I've never done it. And so at the process, there were a lot of activities that helped me learn how to express my anger, but also my other emotions that I hadn't express before. And I felt almost as if I was like moving energy. It was really cathartic to be able to express all those emotions that I had never learned how to express. And then beyond that, the biggest and most important takeaway from Hoffman for me was learning that I am not my old ways of being. These negative patterns, as they call them at the process, were adopted unconsciously, and they were adopted and learned from my parents. And my parents learned them from their parents. No one is to blame. They're not to blame, and I'm not to blame. So for some time during the process, you learn to truly, genuinely forgive and have compassion for yourself and for your parents for having those patterns. And after doing that, I remember being like, okay, well, like, I feel true, genuine forgiveness and compassion, but if I'm not that, then what am I? If I'm not this anxious, afraid, fearful person, then who am I? So you go through this like existential crisis, but I absolutely needed that, because then it's like a clean slate, and then I was able to build upon who I really am. And the word that kept coming back to me over and over during the process was courage. Going to the Hoffman process really helped me reclaim my courage. Courage in the context of my career, my romantic relationship, my friendships with my family, with my parents, and of course with my creative projects. And so I left Hoffman feeling not just more free, because I realized that I'm not my old ways of being. I am not my negative patterns. I am not those unconscious things that I learned. I am courageous, and I am hopeful, and I am more brave. There is a saying at Hoffman that goes like, my life is my responsibility. And I learned, I took away from that if I want to live a life of purpose and meaning, of creativity, of fun, adventure, wanderlust, and joy, I'm the only person who can create that for me. I am responsible for what life has in store for me, whether good, quote unquote, or bad, quote unquote. And I'm responsible for choosing to respond to life versus react to life. It falls on me. And interestingly enough, maybe in years past, this would have caused me to feel like an internal pressure to have a perfect life, to have a perfect response to what happens in life. But today I don't feel that. I don't feel that pressure. I don't feel the need to have a perfect life, because while I have control over my responses, I also have genuine faith and choose to surrender to what life unfolds for me. And so it's an interesting balance that I find myself in, is that I'm brave and I'm courageous and I want to create a life of meaning and purpose, at the same time that I let things flow and let things be and surrender to what life can offer me. And this balance of surrendering and also taking action is one that I had not ever really found before, and the Hoffman process really helped me find it and believe that it can be true. After the process, I was like, is this even real? Did I live that? It was incredible. And so I'm just excited to bring this energy into my life, to my relationships, into 2024. And if you are even remotely interested in the Hoffman process, I recommend you check out their website. I'll link it down below. Or if you want to talk a little bit more about whether this is the right retreat for you, they also offer free informational calls, and you can reach out to the folks that work there, or I'm also happy to answer any questions. But I hope this was useful to you, and thank you so much for listening and watching, if you're watching this. Thanks so much, and I will see you next week.